I was 7 years old the summer I stayed with my grandmother. Her house stood at the end of a quiet, tree-lined street, the kind of place where everything seemed frozen in time. The wallpaper in the hallways was peeling, yellowed with age, and the air always carried the faint scent of lavender mixed with the mustiness of old books. It was comforting during the day, but at night, the smell turned strange, almost too strong, like it was trying to hide something underneath. My grandmother's room was downstairs, while mine was upstairs, all the way at the end of a long hallway. She told me she liked having me up there because I could look out over the garden and the woods beyond. I didn't argue, but something about being that far away from her made me uneasy. The staircase creaked under my feet every night as I went to bed, and I always felt like something was watching from the shadows at the top. That particular night, the air was heavier than usual, and the old ceiling fan did little to move it. I lay in bed, staring at the faded floral curtains that shifted slightly in the breeze from the open window. The sound of crickets outside should have been calming, but it only emphasized how silent the house was otherwise. Then, I heard it, the faintest sound of footsteps on the wooden floorboards outside my room. At first, I thought it was my grandmother. Maybe she had come upstairs to check on me. But the steps didn't sound right. They were too soft, too slow, as if whoever it was glided instead of walked. The boards never groaned the way they usually did when she moved around. I turned over, pulling the thin blanket up to my chin, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But curiosity got the better of me. The door was half open, and through the gap, I could see part of the hallway bathed in the weak glow of the nightlight plugged into the wall. That's when I saw it. A shadow stretched across the wallpaper, long, thin, and impossibly tall. It moved past my door without a sound, its shape distorted like a person stretched out too far. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to scream for my grandmother, but the sound refused to leave my lips. My small body trembled under the blanket, every instinct telling me to hide. The shadow didn't pause, didn't look in at me. It just slid by, disappearing into the darker part of the hallway. I stayed frozen, eyes locked on the crack of the door, waiting for it to come back. Minutes felt like hours before exhaustion finally dragged me into a restless sleep. When I woke the next morning, sunlight poured into the room, and everything looked harmless again. I tried to laugh at myself, but I couldn't shake the memory. Over breakfast, I told my grandmother what I'd seen. She stirred her tea slowly, her face calm but her hands trembling just enough for me to notice. "No one was upstairs last night," she said softly. "Just you, sweetheart." I frowned, waiting for her to smile and tell me it was just a dream. She did smile, but it wasn't the warm smile I knew. It was tight, forced, as if she wanted me to stop asking questions. Then she reached across the table, brushing a strand of hair out of my face with a hand that shook more than usual. "Sometimes old houses play tricks," she whispered, almost as if she was talking to herself. "Don't pay it too much mind." But I did. That night, as I climbed the stairs, I kept glancing behind me, half expecting to see the shadow following. And as I lay in bed, lavender thick in the air, I wondered if maybe my grandmother knew more about what haunted those hallways than she was willing to admit. I was 9 when I first started talking to Eli. At the time, I didn't think it was strange. Lots of kids had imaginary friends. My parents thought it was cute, harmless. They laughed when I told them Eli liked peanut butter sandwiches or that he hated when the curtains were closed. But Eli wasn't like other imaginary friends kids talked about. He didn't just exist in my head. He whispered, and not just during the day, but at night, when everything was silent and I should have been asleep. It started one night when I was lying awake, staring at the ceiling. I remember hearing a voice, soft and hushed, coming from under my bed. "Can you hear me?" it asked. I froze, my small heart hammering in my chest. At first, I thought it was a dream, but then the voice spoke again, clearer this time, closer, don't be scared. I'm Eli." From then on, Eli was always with me. He told me stories when I was bored, secrets about people I knew, things a kid my age shouldn't understand. Once, he told me my teacher was crying in the bathroom during lunch because she hated her life. The next day, I noticed her eyes were red and swollen. Another time, he said my father had lied about being stuck in traffic. He was actually at a bar. That night, I overheard my parents arguing about it. It frightened me, but it also made me feel special. Like Eli trusted me with knowledge no one else had. One night, as I lay curled under my blanket, Eli's voice slithered out from under the bed again. "Look," he whispered. "Look under here. I want to show you something." I hesitated, clutching the blanket tight. But curiosity tugged at me, and slowly, with trembling fingers, I leaned over the edge of the bed. The floorboards beneath me came into view, scratched, deep grooves gouged into the wood as though something with claws had been dragging itself upward, trying to get out. "See," Eli said softly, "I've been waiting for you." I jerked back up, heart pounding, pulling the blanket over my head. My parents dismissed it the next morning when I told them. They said it was just my imagination, that maybe I'd scratched the wood myself playing with toys. But I knew better. The marks had been too deep, too wild. That night, I tried to ignore Eli. I kept the light on, stuffed my ears with tissue, and hummed to myself until exhaustion pulled me under. But sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. My ankle was freezing, something cold and bony wrapped around it from beneath the bed. I screamed, thrashing, and the grip let go instantly. My bedroom door slammed open, and my parents rushed in, turning on the lights. Nothing was there, just me, panting, pointing at the bed. My mother checked under it, pulling out dust bunnies and old toys. She insisted nothing was wrong. My father looked angry, like I'd inconvenienced him with another nightmare. They tucked me back in and told me to sleep. But as they left and the door closed, I heard it again, soft, mocking laughter. Then Eli's voice, whispering from the darkness beneath me. "They don't believe you. They never will. But I'm real, and I'll always be here." From that night on, I slept curled in the middle of my bed, refusing to let my hands or feet dangle over the edge. I never spoke about Eli again. Not to my parents, not to anyone. But the scratches in the wood stayed there, etched deep into the floorboards long after we moved out. And sometimes, even now, when I wake in the middle of the night, I swear I can still feel phantom fingers brushing against my ankle, as though Eli never left, just waiting for me to acknowledge him again. When I was 12, my parents sent me to stay with my cousin for a few weeks during the summer. His house was older than my grandmother's, tucked away at the edge of a small town. It was one of those places that looked harmless in daylight, sunlight catching on the faded shutters, kids riding bikes out front, but at night, the house seemed to breathe, the wooden beams groaning like they were alive. The basement was what fascinated me the most. It was huge, unfinished, and colder than the rest of the house. My uncle used it for storage, but instead of boxes or tools, it was filled with old dolls, dozens of them. They sat on sagging shelves, broken rocking chairs, and even directly on the concrete floor. The glass eyes, some cracked and cloudy, followed you no matter where you stood. I hated going down there, but my cousin loved daring me to. He said the dolls used to belong to the previous owner's daughter, who died in that house. He swore she still played with them. I laughed it off during the day, but when the lights flickered in the basement, or when I swore I heard faint giggles down there, I didn't feel like laughing anymore. One weekend, my cousin had an idea. "Let's sleep down there," he whispered excitedly. "Just for one night. Bet you can't." I wanted to say no, but I didn't want to be called a coward. So that night, we dragged our sleeping bags to the center of the basement, surrounded by the dolls. Their pale faces looked even worse in the weak light of the single bulb overhead, shadows stretching across the tiny bodies. We laughed at first, daring each other to poke the cracked ones, joking about which one looked the creepiest. But by 2 in the morning, the laughter was gone. The bulb overhead flickered once, then steadied. When I glanced around, I noticed something strange. The dolls weren't where we had left them. They weren't lined up neatly on the shelves anymore. They were closer. A few of them now sat on the floor around us, facing inward, like they'd been arranged in a circle. I shook my cousin awake. "Did you move them?" I whispered. He blinked at the circle of dolls and shook his head, his face pale. We told ourselves we must have been tired, that maybe we'd done it earlier and forgotten. But then it happened again. Every time the bulb flickered, the dolls shifted, slowly, deliberately, closing in around us. We sat frozen, our sleeping bags pulled tight around us. I tried not to blink, afraid of what I'd see next. Then, one of the dolls moved. Not in a flicker, not in a trick of the light, it moved on its own. Its head turned, slowly, painfully slow, until its cracked glass eyes met mine. That was enough. We bolted upstairs, tripping over each other as we scrambled out of the basement, slamming the door shut behind us. My cousin swore he heard tiny footsteps following us up the stairs, but I was too terrified to turn back and check. When his parents found us huddled in the kitchen, trembling and pale, we tried to explain. They told us it was just our imagination, that old houses and shadows could play tricks. But I noticed the way my aunt avoided looking at the basement door, how my uncle muttered something under his breath before locking it with a key I'd never seen him use before. For the rest of my stay, the basement remained shut tight. I never asked to go near it again. But on my last night there, I woke to a faint sound outside my door. It was soft but unmistakable, the clatter of porcelain tapping against wood. When I opened my eyes, I saw one of the dolls sitting in the hallway, just outside my bedroom. It wasn't there before. I never stayed at my cousin's house again. Years later, when his family sold it, the realtor gave potential buyers tours of every room, except the basement. That door stayed locked, sealed, and silent. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can still see that doll in the hallway. Waiting.